The RFNG is supported in part by funding from the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council. Languages inspire. They connect. They create our sense of self and our sense of place. They make us who we are, which is why we must fight to keep our traditional languages alive. Language is law. Hello, and welcome to the Inherent Rights Informed Voices podcast. It's brought to you by the Center for First Nations Governance and the Rebuilding First Nations Governance project. Today, we're learning how important language is for nation rebuilding, identity, and how the youth and elders play a vital role from a community practitioner perspective. My name is Dr. Mason Ducharme, and I will be your host for today. I am very excited to speak with my Shnookwas from Niiwat Nation about the importance of traditional language. A bright young person I've had the pleasure of working with during my time as a National Community Research Director at RFNG and Executive Director at CFNG is our first guest, Lexlixatkwa7 Nelson. Studying First Nations and endangered languages, Lexlixatkwa is passionate about inspiring others to learn their traditional language. Lexlixatkwa was a youth fellow with the CFNG and RFNG, where they work to understand the ways languages can be implemented into their community. Our second guest, Sonia Leo, has spent over a decade supporting Indigenous communities in cultural sustainability and self-determination. During her time as an Inherent Rights Fellow with the RFNG, she led the Language Literature Review, Recovering and Revitalizing Laws from Traditional Languages. Amashnanet, it's good to see my Shnookwas here, Lexlixatkwa and Sonia. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having us.
Always happy to see you too.
It's always nice to see my Shnookwas. And for our listeners, Shnookwas means either cousin or relative. And for the listeners, both Lexlixatkwa and Sonia are from Niiwat Nation, which is where I'm from too. So that's why we call each other Shnookwas. So I have the privilege of sitting here today with Lexlixatkwa and Sonia. And what they really helped us do at RFNG was create a language and lawmaking literature review. And that's what today's conversation will be about, is their experience with that. So my first question to both of them is, how was that literature review process for you? Like, what did you take from that? Because to be honest, I don't think you guys would consider yourselves advanced researchers, right? Or legal experts. So this must have been a really fascinating experience for you.
It was transformative for me in a way where I went to university. I know how to do a literature review. But this was different in the sense that the topic was revitalizing language for lawmaking and those kind of broad topics, right? But what I learned from my experience almost right away is that everything is interconnected, that there is no separation in, our worldviews from the Indigenous perspective between land, language, laws, culture, spirituality. It's almost like it's impossible to just speak on one without speaking of it all, And so that was a theme throughout it was amazing to see, like book after book, paper after paper, to see that, like, wow, it's all relational, it's all interconnected. And that if we're going to talk about laws, you have to talk about, the spirituality, the land, everything, right? And so that was so cool to see. And then from my actual experience with it is that, I got the opportunity to go to the community and speak with some elders. I think it was a workshop or it was some kind of a gathering or a meeting that we met together.
Wow, yeah, that's a hard one to follow up on. I want to keep asking you questions on that now. Yeah, I really enjoyed the process. I didn't have previous experience really past university on doing a literature review. I worked in digitization, the digitization program, for digitizing cassettes and all of that through the ZIL Learning Center. And so through that, it was kind of like doing research, because you just spend hours and hours recording over, recording cassettes, putting it onto the computer, making it so that you can hear the sound easier. So you go through editing and all of that. And so me and my coworker, Claudia Thavarge, we both worked on that for about 2 years. That's kind of what the literature review felt like as well, where we had that Basecamp library. And so someone would say, hey, this was a really cool paper, kind of these kind of points were on it if you guys want to look at it. And that was so fun, getting my emails being like, oh, someone added another document onto Basecamp, and more of these papers kept getting uploaded. And it felt like kind of like a treasure hunt sometimes when you're trying to find that one quote that you remember reading. And sometimes I really had to learn and remember to highlight and write out, not only annotating on the digital document, but also on a physical notes page, so that I know exactly where these things were. So I felt like it was a really big learning opportunity as well, being able to write and kind of continue my knowledge on language and research in that field. So I really liked it, and I feel like I learned quite a bit, but it was hard for me to focus, because I feel like I have two lives, where one is when I'm back in the home community on my family farm, and so I'm fixing a fence, going to feed the chickens, talking with family friends or family and elders, and kind of doing that aspect of the language work, and then also trying to find a book from such and such time in online that's been digitized or something. And so it was really really strange trying to mix and match the literature research aspect and like feeling like a scholar or something. And then also balancing that out with like being a community member and being able to actually go and like visit with elders was another part that kind of came from the literature review. And I got to know some elders that I'm forever grateful for knowing as well. And so that was a really good experience for me.
That's beautiful. I'm really glad we got you both on the podcast. You know, you're creating this beautiful imagery of what this experience was like for you. You know, I like that metaphor, Lexlixatkwa, about a treasure hunt. And that's what I always tell people about research. If you're doing good research, you'll go in there with about 2 or 3 questions that you want to answer. And you answer those questions, but you leave with about 5 or 6 more questions. And that's how you know you're doing really good research, right? You're on that treasure hunt. And I think both of you mentioned something that's really important too, and that's that connection with elders. You know, Sonia, you mentioned, an elder that passed away. And maybe it's time where we dedicate just a couple minutes to reflect on him, because I think we need to honor his legacy. It's the great late Raymond Pierre. He was the leader of Shkalach and Shkalanchut, and, you know, whether he'd like to admit it or not, he was a mentor to each of us in his own ways. And maybe we could just share, what was it like working with Ray? What were some stories you have about him? Because I think we need to carry on his legacy, and that's something I shared at his gathering was, Ray was one of the few people that, in your words, Sonia, walked the talk. We always talk about the importance of succession planning. The youth need to be here. We need to prepare them for, what their roles are going to be. But how often do we actually see that in practice? I think of 2 elders who actually said that and have actually said, I'm going to empower Mason as the next generation. And that's Dr. Satsan Herb George and Raymond Pierre. They saw my potential and they wanted me to be involved. They knew that I would be the next generation, one of the next generations to carry on their work. So if you guys are comfortable with it, just a few reflective sentences on him.
I got to like meet him through the literature review project, and so I didn't really know how to go about it. But anytime I was able to go up and visit, and I was kind of really shy, as I usually am when meeting new people. I try not to show it now. I'm a lot better at hiding it, but I was like, okay, I'm gonna go to this elder's house and like help with digitizing or something. I didn't really know what it was gonna look like at all. And yeah, and it ended up just being like a really chill kind of hangout time. And it was really awesome being able to grow this relationship with Ray, because I never really had an elder that I could talk about books with. And so he would be telling me about like something that he was reading, and then I would say, oh, do you know that one? I mentioned my favorite book that I will always recommend to everyone is always Fire in the Word. It's a manifesto of the Zapatista movement. And it's kind of very niche. I only heard about it through another family friend, and it's kind of the first, it's kind of embarrassing to say this as someone who was doing literature, a literature review, but it was kind of the first like nonfiction book that I read in my own time, in that way. And so me and Ray started talking about it, and I was like, oh, let me go get my copy and I'll bring it the next time. So then the next time I'd go over and I'd bring like the book, and then he'd end up calling me, and so he started calling me often, and we got to just kind of chat, and it always kind of did a really good job at reminding me, oh yeah, make sure you're working on this thing that you said you were going to, and keeping you accountable in that way. That was like always my favorite thing, was that we could just kind of nerd out in a way on books, and he was always reading everything, and then he would ask me like if I knew of a story or knew how to like get this story onto the computer, and so I would do like computer work for him, or kind of like at one point I was hanging out for like maybe 2 or 3 hours just like scanning sheets to put onto his computer. Like that's kind of a big part of digitization work is literally just like waiting for things to load and scan it and upload it onto the thing. And so I was hanging out for a while just going through his pages, and then every once in a while we'd start getting into conversation, and it was just really, really awesome in that way.
Yeah, so for me, if only I could have had more time with him, you know. I unfortunately didn't, but the time that I did, it's incredible, because they say one of the approaches to recovering loss through language includes leaning on our elders and knowledge keepers who speak the language, like Ray, right? And for their guidance, right? And so how lucky I was for that moment in time to have him open up to me and to share, you know, instead of shaming me or getting angry that I don't speak it, or, you know, making me feel bad. His generous heart, you know, and his caring, you know, spirit was just like, this is what I have, please, you know, take it and carry it on. And so, again, I didn't get the opportunity to really, you know, spend so much time with him. But I know through the work that he's done for the community, you know, I'm sure that it's going to be there. You know, this digitization that was just shared, I'm looking forward to accessing it so I can learn more, you know. And the thing is even though he's not here, I feel like his the knowledge that he gathered from his life is going to be passed on in different ways. So I'll be able to absorb it that way. And then I think that's what a true elder is. It's about, you know, thinking about the generations ahead and living in a good way, you know, so that we can follow in his footsteps. And I think like Mason, like you said, like what an honor for him to have said that to you, you know. So perhaps by staying close to you, we're staying close to Ray, you know, and his teachings. So yeah, that's all I have on that one, but it's absolutely what a gift. So actually, it's a lesson too. When we're with elders, celebrate the time, you know, don't waste time, you know, it's like in that moment, don't be shy, you know, ask the questions, you know, learn from them, listen, you know, listen to what they're saying, gather that knowledge, gather that wisdom, you know, be respectful, and then just be present, because tomorrow isn't promised. I mean, for any of us really, but especially with the elders, treasure the time that we have with them. So that's the great lesson for me, is because I thought, oh, I'll have lots of time in the future to connect with him and then learn from him. But look at what I got, you know, and I'm, you know, instead of saying, oh, it's not enough, it's more than enough, because it's enough for me to start somewhere, right? And I think that's what's important, is start where we are, start with what we have, you know, don't focus on the lack, focus on the abundance of the gift that he left, you know, and carry that forward.
What a beautiful closing reflection on that one, Sonia. And that just shows you how powerful of a presence he had, where, you know, just a short amount of time you felt all of those things, right? And I think Lexlixatkwa touched on something that's really important for people that are doing literature reviews, is a love for books and readings. And I know just before we started our podcast, we were kind of nerding out about some readings or some authors. So what were some of the readings or authors that really stuck out for you when you were doing this literature review?
There was one, I believe it was I ended up getting this book as well, Anton Truer, I believe. It was on the Language Warriors Manifesto, I believe that's what it was called. Yeah, there was just, that was a really good one that I would recommend, and it kind of talks about a lot of the themes we're kind of bringing up today, is being on a language journey and the responsibility that kind of comes with that. I don't want to say responsibility like too strongly though. It's like the ways that being on your own language journey, it's like a building network of people that you keep each other encouraged to continue each of your individual language journeys. And so he kind of talks about that with like his relationship with like knowledge keepers and growing that and continuing it, and what that means for his children. And yeah, I wanted to bring up, me and my mom have a phrase that we ended up coining, was doing anything is improvement. And it's kind of, I find that one really helpful, where even if you're like doing like trying to read a big paper and it can be a bit overwhelming and daunting, even just reading the first chapter or reading a random chapter from like a book or something, that's like sometimes that one chapter really does give you a lot to think about and a lot to learn about. And, you know, you can always circle back to it, but just kind of being patient with yourself as well, because you can only learn so fast.
So basically, we were provided from the beginning a list of suggested readings, you know, and when I looked at them or when I read them, I realized, like, from an academic world, great, you know, great way to, you know, fill the box of getting a good grade if a professor is grading it. But then knowing that the intention of this was to reach community, right? And like how to really speak the language that will resonate with them, right? Because there's a difference, right? And so I realized, like, I had to actively search out First Nations authors, you know, and Inuit and Métis authors, researchers, who have published great lengths of books, papers, and written thesis, you know. And when I did that, it transformed, it's almost like it was waiting for me, you know. And it was like, all of a sudden, when I was kind of hitting my head when I was doing like a non-Indigenous researcher, you know, reading their papers, it wasn't clicking. It felt like two puzzle pieces that just would not fit, you know. And I would try, and I knew, and I had to step back. That was my sign where it's like, wait a minute, you know, get back to my roots, you know, like, I mean, like, I prayed on it, meditated on it, journaled on it, and saying, okay, like, you know, I did go to university. I know how to do research. Why isn't this working? And then it's like, wait a minute, get back to basics. And when I say get back to basics, it's like, know that at this point in time, in 2025 is when we wrote this, it's 2026 now, but there has been a lot of work done in these areas. Maybe they don't use the same terminology today, right? And so it's the same ideas. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. Our people have been working towards these endeavors, this mission, you know, of what we call self-determination or self-governance for decades, you know? And so what I did and what I loved was UBCIC, so the Union of BC Indian Chiefs, they have a library and archives. And they have all these magazines. It used to be very easy to search. So you would go into this, you would put in keywords, and all of a sudden it's like our ancestors or these people are talking to us saying, this is, you know, back then the people came together, you know, and they had their voice collectively, and it's just kind of carrying that on. And then the other portal that I use for research is the University of Saskatchewan. And so they have this portal where it's all Indigenous writers, researchers, publishers, and sources. And so when I used those outlets, all of a sudden I wasn't alone. It wasn't just me. It was like, wait a minute, what do I want to share based on what everyone has already said? And then that's where it comes into what I kind of shared earlier, was the work and the research has been done. It's time to bring it to life and walk the talk and take the actions, right? But of course, there's some authors or researchers that were just, of course, amazing. Jim Burrows. I don't want to discredit anybody, but there was quite a few where I'm like, wow, it was so beautiful to read what they're saying. I think there was one called Zuni. Sorry, I don't know their names. I haven't memorized them, but just know that they're, especially Jim Burrows, he's done books on this topic. There's also the lady who works with the RFNG. I forget, she's from the East Coast. Metallic, right? I know last names, but because we've cited them so much. But it's really like, yeah, there's many. So what I turned to was the different Indigenous websites. So another thing, though, is that sometimes there'll be funding for research, right? Indigenous-led research, but then they have to shut down, right? So, but however, luckily, a lot of this stuff that was collected while these organizations were in operation are still available online. So I know one of them is Assembly of First Nations, in the sense that they've done a lot of reports, they've done a lot of research, and although they might not be active in the work, they do list the publications, so that was a great resource. But I think Burroughs was a highlight for sure. Repeatedly referenced them, but I also don't want to discredit maybe the ones who just had, a small contribution to what I wrote about. However, no matter how small, it's not a hierarchy. That one small piece motivated me to say, you know what, you're on the right track, you're on the right path here, keep going, and it's kind of like a candy in a path kind of thing, So, yeah, I think every single author or publisher who contributes to this work, and then it just makes me feel like, yes, we're not alone in this.
I love that. That shows the importance of, the indigenous traditional knowledge and how it might not be viewed in the academic world as a journal, but it can be viewed in different outlets too. And not to discredit those because they're equally as important. And just to make sure I get my little take in there, I think my favorite piece of literature was from Naomi Metalik, and it was called Six Examples Applying a Meta-Principle Linguistic Method, Lessons for Indigenous Law Implementation. And that one was a really fascinating one for me. And I think we could give a little shout out to our nation's first doctor too, Dr. Lorna Williams. She does a lot of work in language. I think one of the things she has published is our what's that principle one called, Lexlixatkwa7? Is it the principles of learning?
Yeah.
Yeah, that one's a
With the
beautiful one. It's beautiful. That's even used in universities across Canada too. I hear about UVic saying, I know Dr. Lorna Williams, we talk about those principles. We try to implement them in our classrooms. And one of my proudest moments in my career so far is I helped co-write an article called Revitalizing Indigenous Languages, Fostering Self-Governance, Overcoming the Indian Act, a case study of the Wet Nation. And that was with me, Giuseppe, Lorna Williams, Satzan, Shout Martina Pierre, and Raymond Pierre. And I gotta say, that was a real proud moment for me. Because when we first wrote that, it was just, all of us were not doctors with the exception of Giuseppe and Lorna. But by the time that was published, I was a doctor, Satsam was a doctor, and Martina was a doctor. And I remember the editor even reaching out to Ray, calling him Dr. Raymond Pierre, and he was just blushing. He's like, I'm not a doctor, man, but that's so cool to read that. And I know that was something that he was really proud of, was to be in an academic paper. Like, that's a pretty big deal. And that was a really proud moment. And I think, since that one kind of talks about revitalization, I'm going to go to a question about that. And it's, how have you seen the impact of revitalizing Uklamush in the Wet Nation?
I think the amount of people wanting to learn has been the most exciting thing to see. Like, I feel like a lot more people, pretty much everyone I talk to at least shows interest of learning the language, whereas when I was first going to school, a lot of people would say, well, why would I do that? Or what kind of, like, how does it, support me in my future or something? But nowadays, you don't really hear anyone, like, it's kind of more of why not, why wouldn't you? And that's been super, super exciting. I'm really happy to see, like, even just saying, like, oh, at the gas station. I really want to hear more like, at the grocery store or the gas station, when we see community members. I hope that people, like, if you know how to say it in you should just say it in not, you don't even have to translate yourself after, just, just like say the word and move on kind of thing. I think that would be really cool to see. And just a lot more of the, like, normalizing of the language. I think that would be brilliant. I know that they have more of the presence of the language in the different schools now as well, even in the elementary school in the town, in like Pemberton as well, like not even just in our community area. I think it's cool seeing like this normalization of our language, because everyone knows that it's like, at least territory, so why shouldn't we be showing interest in learning the language? It's even non-Indigenous people are showing an interest, so that's been really exciting.
So I can only speak from my experience. And so on one hand, I just want a disclaimer, I don't live in community, so I don't get to access it in that way. But just from my experience, from when being I guess you could say urban Indian or urban native, and someone who goes frequently back home. Well, to begin, the reason why that is the way it is because my grandfather was forced into the institution of residential school, where he was forbidden to speak the language, where he was punished for speaking the language. So I always feel like when we talk about revitalizing the language, it's also like, wait, remember why we might not be there yet. And I love, like, in some areas and for some people, it's there. That's where people like Ray, or like spaces like this where it's encouraged to revitalize, that's coming from a very great healing place. And so I think it's important to realize that some of us, are not there yet, and respecting that that's where they're at, and knowing that the both two can exist, right? And so that is kind of why I love doing this, here with you, and because it's like it puts me in a different time and space to have that hope and be in that positive realm of this, of regeneration or remembering of our language, but then honoring that sometimes it's discouraged, right? And it's ridiculed and it's shamed. And so going back to my own lived experience was both my grandparents are fluent speakers, but they didn't want to speak it to us because they thought that it would be bad for us and we would get punished ourselves, right? And so that's not their fault, it's not that they didn't want to carry on the culture. They wanted to help us survive, and their way in surviving for them meant not practicing the culture, right? And so I don't know why I feel emotional about that, but I just think of like the trauma that they must have went through to have been silenced, to be shamed. And then now we're in an era where we want to reconcile and now speak the language. Like, I think that it's important to remember it's going to take time, and to give the time and space, and that it's not just about government funding or government money or like quarterly reports. It's about giving the time and space needed to recover from that colonial trauma. This is work to be done, but it's also a lot of time that needs to be done. I'm always grateful to see the language come alive, and I know there's lessons, there's courses, that's so awesome, and seeing it I think the children, the preschool or kindergarten, they have the opportunities, and I hear them learning it, and that's so cool. But and that's great to see, so that gives me hope.
Why wouldn't we be emotional? I think that's so completely valid in feeling that emotion. Like, it is an extremely emotional thing that our people have gone through. Like, I really appreciate you saying all of this, because that is the point. That is the exact point of everything that we do in terms of language revitalization, is that our language was systemically ripped away from us. I think about the struggles that so many of our people go through, and I think it's in a way of, I think there's a term, radical hope, or, having that understanding of where we want to be and trying to live towards that every single day, and feeling that pain and feeling that those emotions and not trying to hide them anymore is part of the healing process. We tend to isolate ourselves when we're going through hard times and hard emotions because, that's how people cope. And so making sure that you don't have to isolate yourself from the language.
I'm going to jump in there, and I just want to commend you, Sonia, for being courageous to allow yourself to feel what you need to feel right now. But I think it speaks to a common experience a lot of our people have, And I don't know if you guys know this, but I've been sharing it with everyone. We are now entering our 150th year under the Indian Act. The Indian Act was introduced in 1876, and it was an act, a piece of legislation meant to, people always just say, assimilate us. But Sat Sam reminds me that the earlier stages of it went even darker than that. It was a piece of legislation to assimilate and terminate us. And that was to make sure that they got rid of the Indian problem. And residential school was a technique for that. And I'm sure the three of us sitting around here, we have grandparents or other ancestors that went to residential school, and we're feeling the intergenerational impacts that it had, right? And it's difficult to navigate that. It's difficult to even translate it to a non-Indigenous person, what we're feeling. They'll be like, why are they crying about language? It's like, language is tied to identity. And if you lose that language, you lose part of your identity, right? So it's deeply personal. And I hear elders say all the time, Uklamuk Tumuk. And that means the people and the land are one. And I also hear them say that our language comes from the land. So language is highly personal. Like Lexlixatkwa said, how can we not get emotional when we talk about our language? That means that we care about it. What's the most important or memorable thing you took from this literature review?
What I remember too from like the literature, it was just amazing because it was almost like a spiritual experience in the way that the words, basically what it kept saying over and over, and that's how I knew I was on the right track, was basically our language is like a gift from Creator, right? So it reflects our mind, body, and soul of the people. It comes from the land. We're all connected, right? And so just know that that gift remains. And so it's not lost. So it's like keep opening that gift, and just use it. Not to exploit it or anything, but just to carry it on. I like to always remind the people, no matter what, it's like, remember, since time immemorial, our people, Indigenous peoples, have chronicled vital information through oral tradition. So that's language, right? Everything was shared by language, It's just because it's not written down doesn't mean it doesn't have value, right? And so that's why it's so important to just share what we have, and respect that. And I feel so excited about this stuff, you know what I mean? And it's like, I want to inspire people, and just know that you probably know more than you think, and just like live with no limits in that way. Take what you have and just continue it on, right? This gift was given to our ancestors, but it's still here for us to use.
One of the readings that I did for the literature review has stuck with me for a long time in terms of my own understanding of language revitalization, which was by Bernard C. Pearley. It was called Zombie Linguistics. And it kind of talks about this, especially because I spent 2 years doing learning and doing digitization, which is all about, putting things from VHS or more dated methods of recording or information keeping and putting it onto a computer so that you can kind of update things and keep it accessible and make sure that if anything happens to those cassettes or something, then you still have the information that's on them. It does in a way make things more technical rather than more connected, if that makes sense, where a lot of the time now, if we're ever speaking or visiting with an elder, I find sometimes people will be like, oh, you should record them next time you go visit. And it's like, I don't really want to record someone us having a chat every single time and bringing out a recording device, even though it is incredible knowledge. But I think it's important that we keep these human connections to each other as well. And a lot of the stuff that we want to record has already been recorded. I think that brings me back to what Sonia was saying earlier, like the research has already been done, or the research has been done, but the information is out there. Like someone's written it down and someone has thought about that, and we just need to make sure that we like find everything and put it into one place so we know what's actually been done and find those gaps of information. And that's what's been really cool with the literature review. I feel like it did that very well, where we kind of scoured all over the place trying to find all this information in relation to these themes that we had, and then put it into one kind of timeline, just to remind people, like, we do have a lot of stuff that we're, like, the First Voices especially is always being uploaded, acknowledging people's achievements and being able to recognize, like, what people are doing. Martina mentions that as well, I believe. And yeah, I think that's really cool because there's so much information out there that we just don't know, oh, someone's already doing it. So just getting people connected again is really important for that.
I want to acknowledge and uplift you guys. You know, the tasks that you were given were not small tasks. They were big asks. Sonia, you led 2 of our literature review projects. You stepped up. Those were really important projects, and I commend you for your leadership on those. Lexlixatkwa, you were doing both those literature reviews too, while you were still doing your schooling.
Oh, yeah.
Like, that's crazy that you were able to do that. And I hope this is something that you guys are proud of, because it's important work. You can't have true Indigenous law without having your language. It's crucial. It can't exist without it. And neither can self-government. Can you imagine trying to go back to being self-government but not bringing your language and culture with you? You'd just be you'd be bringing the Indian Act with you, the Indian Act mindset, or bringing the federal government mindset or provincial mindset, or God forbid the municipal style. We got to bring back our own governing systems, our own laws, our own language. So this is crucial work, and I don't think it's the last time we'll be talking about this. So thank you guys, our language, Kukstumkalap. Thank you all on behalf of myself. And I want to recognize too that this literature review also extends to other people that were on your team. It wasn't a 3-person literature review, it was a huge literature review. It was all practitioners. These were all people actually working in community, right? So that was an interesting experience. And you guys amazed me. So thank you so much for your time then, and thank you for your time now.
And I just love to bring these words to life here. So this is from George Manuel, who wrote in the Indian World magazine, back when we used the word Indian, in 1981. He says, "We cannot live by other nations' laws and still expect to survive as an Indigenous people, as an Indigenous nation with an Indigenous cultural identity. Very few Indigenous peoples today assert our Indigenous laws in our families, in our tribes, and in our nations, and that's why we're slowly dying as a nation of people. That's where we're slowly becoming assimilated. That's why we're slowly becoming absorbed into the institutions of the white man. It will continue until we ourselves decide to revive and implement our Indigenous laws. The Great Spirit provided us with the ideology, and the white man has succeeded in making us forget our own ideologies through their institutions. What we have got to do is revive our own and develop our own institutions within the framework of our traditional ideology." So it's just like, that's 1981, So it can still happen, and it's going to happen. I just know it. Thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about this.
With language, there's so much that goes into it. Like, it's related to everything because, it's everything that we could put into words. Thank you all so much for inviting me here as well. This was really nice.
Kuksumkalap to Lexlixatkwa7 Nelson and Sonia Leo for lending your informed voices to this episode. We hope you join us next time on Inherent Rights Informed Voices, reclaiming our rights and ourselves. Next episode, we'll be discussing the importance of citizen engagement when implementing self-governance practices with host Chris Robertson. Our season finale is fast approaching. If you want to ask a question and have it answered on air with Catherine MacQuarrie, make sure to email iriv.rfng@gmail.com. That's iriv.rfng@gmail.com, so your voice is heard.